All right, in this video, let's build a search using our data in our spreadsheet and data tables. So basically, we'll want to load all this data in this type of table. And here we can basically have this pagination, we can have this search, number of entries, etc. And additionally, if we search and find what we're looking for in the table, we would want to be able to click on that line and get our spreadsheet to actually select the row in which that particular data is. So this is the table I'm going to use for that. I'll go under extensions and app script. I'm going to name this project. We're going to want to have some sort of HTML file, so I'm going to click on this plus HTML. I'm going to call it DataTable, I guess. And for this, we're going to need Bootstrap for styling. So we'll go to Bootstrap 5. You can get there by going to getbootstrap.com. I'll leave a link for this so you can find this. If I scroll down, see we have this CSS link. So I'm going to copy that. And I'll go to this and paste it over here someplace in this head section. And then I'll go to Bootstrap again, get the JavaScript part, copy this one, the bundle, go back and paste it in this body section. We'll also add a script tag here so we can write our own JavaScript here. That should be enough for now for this. We'll come back to this and build the actual table in just a minute. But for now, I want to be able to load this HTML somehow in our user interface. We'll probably add a menu item here so we can click and get that table. To be able to recognize it, let's add an H1 tag for right now, which is a heading. We'll probably remove this. But for now, I'm going to make another script file here. And I'll call it menu. So for this, I'll create a function, call it create menu. I'm also going to add another script file here. I'll call this dialog. And here I'm going to do create dialog function for this. So for this dialog function, I'm going to basically create an HTML service. So you want to remember that everything in JavaScript is case sensitive. So every character here, uppercase and lowercase, makes a difference. So the file we're going to use to create this template is that DataTable HTML file. And for this, we're going to evaluate this. And that should return this HTML output. Now for this, we might want to also set some meta tags. Let's see, add meta tag, not set. And this is just to make sure it's responsive, I guess. At least as much as it can be. So for that, if I go to that Bootstrap, see we have this meta right here and the name is viewport. I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And then go back and this content part within code. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. So all of that is a single line. So I'm going to zoom out for a second so you can see, but I'm just going to zoom in and it's going to send it to a new line. That's fine. So that's going to be our actual HTML service. Now we're going to want to load that service in a dialog. And for that, we're going to get our user interface from our spreadsheet. And on this user interface, we're going to be able to do all these different methods. See, for example, like show sidebar or show dialog or all of these different things. So I'll start with this dialog. And you can see here we have this thing that says user interface. And that's going to be basically that HTML, this HTML service. So let's try to run this and see what this actually looks like over here. So if this works and I save this and run this create dialog, let's take care of all the permissions. And let's go check out after I ran this what this looks like here. So see, that did load and we got our actual HTML. Now, additionally, instead of us running this create dialog function manually, we want to have a menu here so we can click and get that to open up. And for that, we're going to use this menu right here. So for that, we're going to basically, again, get our user interface from our spreadsheet app. And here we're going to be able to create a menu. So I'll create a variable menu using that UI variable above. And on this, we're going to have this create menu option. And basically, this caption as string is the name for this menu. So we'll just call this custom search. You can really call it whatever you want. Now, within this menu, we'll have the actual items. So the menu is this drop down like extensions, and the items would be what you see here, like macros, app script, like that. And for this add item, we're going to have, again, the first parameter is going to be the text. And for that, we're going to use something like show search. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Just text again. And the second argument here is going to be the actual function as string that's going to run when we click on this. And that's going to be this create dialog function we've just made here. So I'm just going to pass it there. And finally, we're going to take that menu and add it to our user interface, add to UI. There we go. So that's going to be this function to create a menu. Now, we want that to usually happen as we open our spreadsheet. So what we'll do, we'll add that to our onOpen function, which is a special function here that runs automatically when you load the spreadsheet. And we'll basically just call this create menu function like so. So with this setup now, if I refresh this spreadsheet after saving it, hopefully, it should run this onOpen. It should create this menu, which is going to be all of this. And because that menu is going to have this show search with this create dialog action on it, it should basically allow us to click on it and run this, which will basically load this HTML. So let's see if all of that works. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. And usually it may take a little bit for those menus, extra menus to load here in addition to this default menus. So you can see now that showed up here, custom search. If I open this, we have that show search. If I click on that, it should run that function. So hopefully if you didn't make any mistakes, at this point you should have this. If you do make some errors and this doesn't work, then at this point you would want to open your app script editor and open this executions on the left and see what errors you get. As you can see, I get no errors. It says just completed. Otherwise, it would say failed. And you could click on it and read more about that error. Now for me, I got my whole menu to load. Now what I do need in addition to this, I need to have a function that's gonna grab this data from my spreadsheet from this tab called data. So we're going to create that function. We could do it right here, but I'm going to leave this and create another script file. And we'll just call this server side. Here, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call it get spreadsheet data, I guess. And what we'll do here, we'll basically get our spreadsheet. And that will be our active spreadsheet, meaning the spreadsheet to which this script is connected to. And then within that spreadsheet, we'll get the worksheet by its name. And the sheet we have here is called down here called data. So I'm going to copy that. Go over here and paste. And I'll add a variable here. I'll call it worksheet. Now within that worksheet, which is this, we want to grab this data. So the way I'll do that, I'll just go by this method of getting this first cell and doing Command A to grab this entire range of data. So this first cell would be A1 in this particular instance. So we'll do ws.getRange, and A1 would be the cell. So let's just call this first cell. Make C uppercase. And then from that first cell, we can now do get data region, which will basically do that same like Command A or Control A, see, like it says here. This should basically get us that entire range of data. Actually, let's call it data range. So now that we have that data, we're going to split it in two parts. We'll split it to headers, which is the first row, and we'll split it to the actual data, which is all data that's below that. And for that, we'll basically take this data range and remove the first row out of it, which is our headers. That we can do by doing shift, which is our array method. Well, maybe we can't do it yet because that's not an array yet. So for that reason, what we'll do, we'll add another line here. We'll call it data. And for this, we'll take that data range and do get values to get the actual values, which will be an array at this point. So now I should be able to do data.shift. So what this is going to do, it's going to grab from this array of data the first row, and it's going to drop it, and it's going to save it within this headers variable. So at this point, the data is the data without headers. Headers will be just headers, which is this, basically. So with all of that done, now we'll want to basically return our results. Now, first of all, let's just do a quick console log to make sure this whole thing works. So we'll console log the data, and maybe above this, we'll console log our headers. And I'm just going to run this function right here to confirm that this gets the data as it should. So as you can see, this gets me headers, and this is the rest of my data, row by row. Now this gets me my dates as a date object right here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to get my data by the visual result instead of the underlying data. So like this, instead of just getting the number, we'll get the dollar and all of that. And this date will get the visual date we actually see. And the way we can do that is simply by changing this get values to get display values. Make sure you do the S here, otherwise it's not going to be the same thing. I'm going to save and rerun this so you can see what happens now. So now if you look here, this first part is pretty much the same, but the second part now it has this string dates basically and string numbers in them, which is good for our data table usage. So at this point, now that I know this works, I'm going to comment these lines and I'm going to return those. So we'll just return an object and we'll say data is that data variable, comma, and headers is headers. So we'll return an object with two keys, data and headers, and those would be these variables we get from here. So now after saving this, now we should be able to hopefully call this function using our HTML here. and get that information from our spreadsheet. So let's go ahead first and do the setup we need for our data table. So I'm going to go to our data table. And here, if I scroll down, see, we're using Bootstrap 5. So here's an example of a data table. And you can see we have this JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, 3 parts. I guess let's start by setting up the CSS. So I'm going to grab this link, copy that, and go back. And we need to add those style sheets here on top in our head section. And the way we'll do that, we'll add a link tag. We'll do href attribute. We'll paste that link right in here within this quotes. Before I do that, I want to just finish this line. I'll do rel style sheet. So it knows that this link is for a style sheet. And basically at this point, I'll just go within this quotes and I'll just paste that link I just copied. And I need another one, so I'll just do Command C, Command V, Control C, Control V. And the reason for the second one is because we had a second one here, so I'm gonna have to grab this one as well. So copy this, and instead of this link, I'm gonna paste this other link. Again, all of this is really just a single liner. If I zoom out enough, you'll see that. I just want to make sure I'm zoomed in so you can see what I'm writing here. These are 2 style sheets here. Let's go to HTML and see what that HTML looks like. Now, this is already like filled in with this table. We're probably not going to be using this particular method. We'll have to use JavaScript to populate our table. So we'll leave this one for now. I'll go to JavaScript and see what this is. So this is just the code that's going to actually create the data table. But in addition to that, see, we need all these libraries that are listed below. So I'm going to have to grab all these 3 library links and include them here right before my script tag. And I'll do it below that Bootstrap script. So basically the way this needs to look like, we need to have a script tag, open and close. And then for this, we'll have this src attribute, which will be the source of that script. I'm going to go ahead and copy paste this for 2 lines, or maybe even 3 because we have 3. So let's do 3 of those. So I'm going to go copy paste all those links here. So this is that data table, this first link, copy paste. Then go to the second link, copy paste. You see where this is going. And third one, copy paste. So that should be our setup we need. And all of that was from this Bootstrap 5 page on this datatables.net. Now we need to figure out how we need to do the actual table when we don't have the data in HTML, but we have the data as JavaScript. And for that, we're going to have to go here in docs. Let's take a look. See, we have data sources after styling. It gives us different options, HTML, see, server side, etc. JavaScript is the one we're looking for. So I'm going to do JavaScript data. And let's scroll down and take a look. See, there is that example. It gives us this data set, which is an array of arrays. And this is where it actually loads that data. And this example pound key is the ID of the table in our HTML. Now you can see how it has this columns, which we'll take care of in just a second. Now, first, before we do this, let's scroll up to HTML and see this is the HTML they got. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and go to our HTML file, and right below this H1, I'll paste that table. This is where that whole data table is going to go. And as you can see, the ID for this is example. I'm going to change this. Instead of example, I'm going to call this sales table. Actually, let's go with dashes because that's how you do it in HTML usually. So sales-table, lowercase. So that should be all the HTML we do here. The rest, it's pretty much going to be populated using a script. To populate it using a script, we basically have to do this. But we have to do this using that data we get from our backend. So before we get to copying and using some of these lines, we need to basically go get our data from the server side, which is using this function getSpreadsheetData. And for that, we're going to create a function. So I'll go back to this HTML, and in the script, we'll create a function. We'll call this load sales data. And what this function is going to do, it's going to basically call that backend function. And we can do that by doing google.script.run. And on this, we're going to have two methods. One is with success handler. Let's make sure we type this right. And this is going to accept the callback function when it's successful. And there's another one for failing request. And finally, the last thing is going to be the function we're trying to call, which is going to be that backend function we've created here. That's called getSpreadsheetData. So I'm going to copy that, go back here, and paste it over here. So this line is going to now run that function and hopefully get the return back with this success, assuming everything goes well. If it fails, then it's going to run this failed part. For this, let's just add a quick callback for errors and do just console.log. There was an error. So just console log an error when that happens. And then we're going to have another function here with success handler. And we could just write it right here. But since there's probably going to be quite a bit happening here, I'm just going to put that in a separate function. So I'll just go below this and I'll call it function after data loaded. And this function is going to accept a parameter. And that parameter is going to be basically the return from this server-side function. So we can call it whatever we want. I'm just going to call that res for response. And we want to make sure that we call this function here in this success handler. So essentially, when this function is called, it's going to run this. And if it's successful, it's going to run this after data loaded here, which is going to have this res within this function, which will be the results from this, which will be this object with data and headers in it. Now, if you remember, if I go back to this and just uncomment this console logs for just a second, and I rerun this, you'll see that our headers is this. It's an array of this column headers. Let's actually add a note so we remember what that is. So this is that headers. Just going to put all of this in a single line. We don't really need this. I just want to be able to explain you what's going on as I'm writing this code. So this is that headers portion. And there is that second part here, which is the actual data, which is, as you can see, it's an array of arrays in this format. And if I go to that data table documentation here, you'll see that this data set is in a similar format. It's an array of arrays like this. So the format for this data set is pretty much exactly the way we need it. But the format for this part, columns, see, it's different. In their case, it's basically an array. And in that array, they have this object that says title is the column name. And then the next one, let's scroll up here. And then the next title is this other column name. In our case, our actual response is going to be in this form. So we're going to have to convert it from this to this, what you see in these columns. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, this res is now going to have headers in it, which is going to be this. And that's going to be an array, if you remember. So since it's an array, we can map through that array and create another array using this. And that new array, I'll just call it headers. And the way we'll do that for each one of these headers, so I'll just call it header variable, we'll do a callback function. And we basically need to return for each one of them something similar to this that says title and that header, that. So I'm going to copy this, go back, and I'll paste it right here. I think since we use this object brackets, we're going to have to actually not have this on this same line. So I'm going to have to do this object here, and I'm going to move this and return that. Only here, instead of name, which is hard-coded, we'll just return the header. And that will basically convert this to this, what you see in these columns, in that particular format. It will say title and whatever the title is for each column. And that's going to be this headers variable. So now that we have that in that right format, now we should be able to build the actual data table finally. And that we're going to do by basically doing this. Now in here, it's doing it when the page is ready using jQuery. I don't want to use jQuery, at least in this ready part, but I will use this calling method. So I'll just copy this part within this ready function and go back and paste it over here. Just align this. So I can, at this point, delete this so it all sits together. And I'll remove this semicolons since I'm not using those. Now here, see, it has this columns and it's an array starting here, ending here. Now that is going to be this headers that we've just done. So I'm just going to delete that and do columns is headers like that. Now for the data set, I'm going to get it from that response again. So that's going to be res.data. And the reason that's .data is because when we return it here, we called it data, and this one we called headers. So finally here, this example, if you remember, I renamed that to sales table. That's my ID. I'm going to copy that, and ID is the pound key. The rest is the actual ID. That. So hopefully, if everything goes well, we're going to run this. It's going to go get the info. Then it's going to run this after data loaded. It's going to run that. It's going to create this columns. And then it's going to actually create the table itself. Now, the only thing left is to actually run this, because there's nothing here says to run that. And that we can run maybe when we click a button, or we could run it when the page loads, right? For me, I'm just going to run it when the page loads. So I'll just add an event here. And this is the event when the page loads. And when that happens, we want to run this function load sales data. Let's try to save this, run this, see if we get errors, if there's anything else we have to fix. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. Now we have a menu. We should be able to just click on this and run this. It should definitely take some time. So as you can see, it did load. That's nice. So I may want to make this whole thing a little bigger. let's go ahead and resize this dialog. And that we can do when we actually load the dialog here. We can do this set height. And that would be, well, as you imagine, the height. And then we have the second one that controls the size the other way. So let's go ahead and rerun this, see if these measurements are any better or I have to do more. I want even more than this. So it's up to you to figure out what this size is that works for you. I'm sure if you're not zoomed in to the level that I am, you may want to do something else. Like right now, I'm 160 or 50% zoomed in. That being said, this is enough for me to see the data. See, that gives me the first 10. I can switch this to do like 25 and so on. I have this pagination that already works just like that. I should have this sorting that works by region, by customer. See, we can do this way or the other way. So sorting seems to work. Let's check with numbers. Number sorting seems to work too. I think dates aren't gonna work. See, that's not right. And the reason I knew this wasn't gonna work is because when I looked at their example, it was not here. It was in the previous example, I believe. Here, see, start date. Their dates are in this format of 4-digit year, then 2-digit month, then 2-digit day. One quick way we can fix it, we can just change our dates to be in this format in our spreadsheet. So I could just go here and just change this format. And we can do custom number format. And basically, I want it to be YYYY-DD-MM. Something like that. Let's apply and see what that looks like. See, now I got 2019-04-07. So with this, if I go back and reopen this, there it is. Now we're back to normal. We should be able to hopefully now sort this. So at this point, the search hopefully works the way it should too. Seems to be fine. It should be able to search by any column. So if I do like hats, it grabs all of these. And again, you can just go to other pages, etc. I'm curious if we can search by like Isabella hats and see what happens. Seems like it works. See, it grabs the data from multiple columns now. Maybe I do like Midwest. So now we got all of that. Hats Isabella Midwest. So as you can see, it just works just like that without really doing much. Now, the only thing I want to add to what I've done here, I want to be able to click on one of these lines and I wanted to highlight the row in a background in my actual data. So let's see how we're going to do that. So I'm going to close this, go back to this. So we're going to need a couple of things. First, we're going to need to know which row that is we're clicking on, and we have to have some sort of event happening when we click. So let's try to do some console log to figure out how it works. And also we're going to need something from our documentation too. So let's try to find some events here. I don't know. Let's try this advanced stuff. Let's see if there's events. Oh, this first one actually, DOM events. That might be it. Let's try that. So what is this? On click, this seems to be click event. Does anything happen when I click on this? Okay, seems to be getting the name of the person when I click on the row. And that's done using this. So if you look here, there is this table. And this is what we call that data table. And they save this in this table variable. And then they do this event on that. Let's try to do the same thing. I'm going to copy this. I'll go back to our HTML. And this is that data table. So we're going to have to save this in a variable. So we'll call it table, I guess. And then below, I'm going to paste this. Let's just align this and remove the semicolons. Now here, it basically goes by the table name again. So I'll match our table. And the body of the table, that's going to be generated, I assume, automatically. Now, when we click on one of the rows, it's going to fire this function. And it's going to get us this variable data. Why don't I just try to console log this data so we can see what that looks like? Honestly, what I'm looking for, I want to be able to see, does it give me the index of the row that I clicked on? Now, I don't want to use the data variable name here, even though it should be fine. Let's just rename this row data or something. And we'll use that same here in our console log. So I want to see basically what this event gives me. I'll save this, go back and reopen this. So let me just go ahead and click on one of these like Grace. And I'm going to have to right click and inspect in the browser and go to the console log to see what's going on. And as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff here, but this is what we're looking for, this array. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And as you can see, it gives me the data in that row. Unfortunately, that did not contain the actual index of the row. And that may be because this is calling this dot data. What if we don't call that dot data like this and get the row? Let's see what that does. Save this, go back, and pretty much repeat the same. Click on one of these, right click and inspect, and view the console. So this seems to be it. Let's open it. So I believe the one that they did was like data. This is that function method. See, there's this columns. Is there a row? There is index. That might be what we're looking for. And it also is a function, but there's also row. Let's try this row or index and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and basically just change this to dot row. And let's go ahead and click on it and see if that gives us the row number. I'm going to click on the third one this time. Right click and inspect. Console. This is not what I was expecting to see. This seems to give me exactly the same thing all over again. Let's try index. Let's save this. One more time, I'm going to click on the third row here, right click, inspect, and look at our front end JavaScript. And it tells me 650. Right now, see, I clicked on this one, but that's probably because this is sorted in a certain way, not the same way that it's sorted here. So I want to scroll down to line around 650. I think it's going to be a little off because we have a header and we also have probably 0 index in JavaScript. So let's try to find around 650, this 2018-0106. I think it's this 652 line. I'm going to close this and see if that's West and Lance. Yes. So that index is the actual index in the table. It's going to be a little off though. So first of all, it starts with a 0 count. So 650 for us is 651 as a row number, but also because we have our headers on top here, that's another extra line. So we basically need to add one row just to offset the index. And then we also have to add as many rows as we have above our data. Basically, if this data starts in row 1, then it's going to be one row. But if it started in row 2, then we would have to add another 2 rows. So that means we also need to know which row is the starting row here. And for that, let's go and modify that server-side function here to also return our starting headers row. And that we can do by basically grabbing this first cell. That's going to be our first cell in our data. Let's just call it first row number. And that is going to be, let's take the first cell and get the row number of that first cell. And then here, we'll pass that as a return data to that function. So now what we can do, we can now use this in addition to that extra index 1 to get the right row number that we should actually point to. So let's try this. So I'm going to go back here. And what we'll do, we'll take this row data, which is really row index. And we're going to convert it to a spreadsheet row. Let's actually call it sheet row. For that, we'll take that row index and add 1 to just offset that 0 based to 1 based. And then in addition to that, we need to add whatever that header row number is. And we can get that from this res, from this response. And that's going to be res dot and whatever we named this first row number. And hopefully at this point, the sheet row will be the actual correct row in the spreadsheet. So let's test this and see if this works. Let's actually add some text here so we know when we look in our console log. So let's see if this works. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, search that. This opens up. Let's click on this, again, third one. I'm going to right click and inspect and go to console and see 652. We know that one is already accurate. I'm going to try another one. So I'll actually try to do this after I search for something to make sure it still works. So I'm going to go ahead and click on, for example, this one. So that's Midwest John 2018-97. And that says 1329. Seems correct. So we are getting the correct row number. Now the only thing left is to trigger something to actually highlight this for us. And for that, we're going to need, again, another server-side function in addition to this. And I'm going to call this one select row. And this function is going to accept the row number. And what we'll do spreadsheet app, and we'll do get active spreadsheet. And in this, I guess we'll get the active sheet. And on that, we'll get the range. So the row number is going to be that row number that we're going to pass to this, which is that variable. And we need to give it some column number. I guess we'll grab the first column. So that will be that cell. So that's going to be basically that row in the first column. And we'll basically just do this activate method to activate that cell. Save this. So now we basically should be able to call this select row function in our front end. And what we'll do, we'll just go back to here. So instead of doing this console log, so I guess I'll keep the console log. But what I'll do here, I'll do that google.script.run again. And we'll run this select row function and we'll pass this sheet row number here as a parameter. Now again, we should probably do some success handler and some error handler on this too. But I don't want this video to be 4 hours long. So I'll save this. We'll go back and I'm going to go ahead and do this. Let me actually just zoom out to a normal level at this point for this testing. And I'm just going to go ahead and, for example, click on this Edward. And as you can see in the background, it did select that in our spreadsheet for Edward. So let's say we're trying to find something. So I'm trying to find John, Midwest, Revive. And this is the one, right? So I click on this. So that should select that. See on top, this is now selected. That's John. Now, maybe it's better to select the whole row. Maybe let's try that. So I could probably just do that by simply changing this instead of doing this. I should be able to just do this backticks, which is that upper left key next to 1 on our keyboard. And basically when you select a row, you usually do something like this, 3:3. Only instead of this 3, we'll do that variable, which is called row number. And instead of this 3, we'll do that same variable, row number again. Save this. Let's try that. So I'm going to open this. You could also do a button and assign it to a button if you don't want to open it from the menu. And here we'll be able to find whatever we're looking for. Let's say we're trying to find the highest amount of sale for Edward. So I can search Edward and do this sales amount highest to lowest. It's going to be this. So now I can click on this. So you can see how it now selected the whole row for me instead of just selecting that first cell. Now, the last thing I want to do here before I end this video, right now, when I go here to click on one of these lines, I get this weird cursor. It would probably be nice for us to change this to a hand, similar to the one we get here when we sort. So we should be able to do it by styling this. So if I just go ahead and add a style container right here in this head section. So we'll just say if we go over any of the rows, which is TR in the table. Now this is that table and this is the ID of the table. So I'm going to say if it's a table with an ID this, and there is a row TR in that, let's make the cursor pointer. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to save this, go back, close this. See, now I get a hand anytime I roll over any of these. It might be worth to add some sort of background color to show which row we're hovering over. So for that, we should be able to do this hover. And let's see if that background color is enough. Because it might be the row background color, but not the actual, this actually should be TR. So this might be the background color of the row, but it may not actually affect the data cell itself. Let's take a look and see what happens. Works pretty well. That would be pretty dark. You could do lighter colors so you can see the font. Or you could possibly change the font color too. You could do like color white or something for this. And then this, maybe we'll change it to black. You can use hex colors here and stuff like that. RGB colors, all that works. Here we go. See, now we know which row we're on. And as I click on this, that should highlight that row, as you can see in our data. If I click on this one, that highlights that row in our data. Now, this is not movable right now, this dialog, even though we can see the background. I think if we use one of the other dialog methods, we should be able to also move this. And that we can do by going to our dialog here. And instead of doing this show dialog, we can do show, I guess this one, modal dialog. Let's see. So see, this has the interface and it has the title. So for this one, we're going to have to do a title after a comma, search table or something. It doesn't matter. So with this one, let's see if we're able to actually move it. So actually this one, even though I'm able to move it, as you can see, I'm not able to work in the background, but that means that's that third one. So that's going to be that show this one. And at this point now we should be able to both move it and be able to work in the background and see the background. So that loads. Now I should be able to hopefully see, click on this like title part and move it around. And then if I search for something, and click on it, that should highlight that row, and we should be able to still kind of work in here in our data set if necessary. And that's how we can use a data table. Comment and let me know what other videos you want to see. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.